Alright, so with our creating an eDrawings file, if you've already done your exploded view, added materials, which I've skipped for now, but don't worry about that. There's a publish to eDrawings button here, but just as easily, or probably better, is to do save as. House files. All you do is change the file type to eDrawings. So if you're in a part or an assembly, it'll automatically go to whichever type. And then you click on options, and I'd like you to check this box, okay to measure this eDrawings file. All right, so you can actually set an eDrawings without giving people the ability to measure things. And you can also check or uncheck this one, allow export to STL. So by enabling this option, recipients of the eDrawings file will be able to save from the file. So that means that basically the 3D model that is contained in that file can be exported by someone else. So an eDrawings file you can't typically open in another 3D modeling software, but if you're able to export an STL file, that STL file can be imported in different softwares. All right, so you're really giving someone control then of your file if you do check that box. Some of the other stuff here, a bit more advanced motion studies that's sort of around animations, but we don't need to worry about that. Press OK, press save. So it'll ask you which configurations you want to save as well. So if you do have configurations in your file, you can save them. Typically you'd save all, but if you wanted to just select certain types, you could do that. I'll go all. Okay. All right, and then we'll have a look at that file. All right. So the exploded view, you can see how that works. It follows again like the steps in our assembly, although it appears to have missed a few. Yeah, so that's not great. Just reset. But under configurations, that's the one where that's really useful, where you can flick between different, basically sets. You know, so you might have an open and closed, or big or small, or if it's something where you've designed, like that table example I showed very early on, large, medium, small, you can flick between the sizes to see the different details, all in that one assembly. All right, so rendering. The software I'm gonna use the SolidWorks rendering software, which is improving all the time. It's not necessarily the best rendering software out there. All right, I now use KeyShot more and more. KeyShot has a plugin with SolidWorks. You basically install it, and there's a button you can press and export to KeyShot, and it will link the files. So when you update the model in SolidWorks, it'll can update in KeyShot as well. But there's a lot of different rendering software out there. And I'm not an expert in rendering, but I do know how to use and create a good quick render that's useful for communicating what you're trying to get across with your presentations. So I've got some old examples here just to talk about quickly some of the things that you can do in the SolidWorks rendering software. And they're all very similar in nature because that was part of the reason why they were set up and used. When you're working for a business or a brand, you may want to present very regularly, okay, all of your different concepts so that there's sort of cohesion across the business. These are sort of some of the things you need to think about or would think about in time with your own projects, okay? Who is the audience? So when you're working with your technical drawings, we talked about a lot, who are you communicating to? Is it a supplier, a manufacturer, or is it a client? All right, it's the same thing with your renderings. So in your renderings, there's a few different things to consider. First, there's your materials and your appearances. So that's what you add to the actual models. Then you've got things like artwork and decals. So this City Farmers stuff and the stuff on the front and the sides, that's created in Illustrator, exported as a JPEG, and then used as a decal onto those surfaces. I'll show you how to do that. Then you've got the scene. The scene is pretty much like the background, the floor, the walls, and that scene can also include the environment and lighting. So I'm just going to flick through some of these. These are not amazing examples of renders, we're just looking at some different aspects. So you've got lighting. Lighting, which one comes from the scene, and two can come from adding lighting materials to objects. Camera angles. So you can set your camera to be orthogonal, you know, like you would do your drawings, front, top, side, or generally you would have them with perspective. All right, so it gives more realism to your images, rather than having them in an isometric where none of the horizontal lines ever meet. Okay, typically you would turn on perspective. With materials, when you're rendering, even though a material on the side says aluminium or it says glass, sometimes there are better materials to be used if you're trying to show a certain appearance. From experience, what you'll learn is it's all about how it looks in the end result. So in certain lighting situations, one material, one type of metal might not look as realistic as another type. Okay, or as good as another type. So there's nothing wrong with changing it around to get the better result. And this is sort of an example about your camera angles. So that's more your isometric type view, where there's not really a lot of perspective, versus a camera angle set up with perspective, give it a bit more realism. The exploded views, which I talked about. So SolidWorks lets you do that. In this case, what we've got is these are rendered in the same image. So if you're trying to get them in a certain orientation or use the same lighting, this would be done with two assembly files. So we've got an assembly here with all the hooks, okay, and everything assembled. Over here, we've got another version of that assembly, which is exploded inside this file. So you might have done the exploded view in the assembly file, brought it into this larger assembly, so you've got one of each part, or one of each assembly, sorry, and then do a new exploded view, select this, and press reuse subassembly exploded view, and it'll just re-explode it in that file for you. And then there's a lot of material variety. All right, so we'll go through and have a look in a second. And those materials can play a big difference when you're trying to work with different lighting effects. So the idea with this is trying to do a light box, which is illuminated from the inside. So when you add, the trouble was though, with the basic SolidWorks rendering software, when you add the lighting material to the box, well, it doesn't really look like it's illuminating from the inside. So instead, you need to change that material to, in this case, it was like a wax, okay, semi-translucent. And then we modeled just a cylinder on the inside of that object, so that object's hollow, a cylinder on the inside, add the light to the cylinder. that then gives off the light and gives off the effect of, you know, a globe in the center which gets darker towards the corners. So that looks a lot more realistic compared to, well, that which just looks like a white square. So in my previous role in point of sale, often trying to go through your renders really quickly. A lot of these renders took maybe 10-15 minutes to set up, another 10-15 minutes to render. So there's no sitting there overnight waiting for renders. These are all very quick. And one of those things, or what SolidWorks lets you do with these quick ones is, you know, render out that quick one, change the appearance of a certain part and re-render. So you can save your camera angles, like we've looked at already with saving views. So you should save your camera angles. And so you might be moving around, but you just go back to that camera view, re-render again, and so everything's the same angle when you then go to present. Okay, so that's just some of the basics. So let's have a look at that now inside SolidWorks. All right, first thing we need to do is turn on the rendering tools. So it's under Tools, Add-ins, and it's called PhotoView 360. So turn that on and turn that on at startup, and that'll turn on whenever your SolidWorks turns on or you open it up. And that allows you to select this Render Tools tab here. So PhotoView 360 is the built-in renderer. SolidWorks has also released a new program which is external, a bit like Keyshot, called SolidWorks Visualize. We'll just have a quick look. Now, SolidWorks Visualize is a lot stronger. It's got a lot more power as far as its presets and basically what you can get out of it. So we'll have a quick look at this.
To quickly and easily create realistic, high-quality images, SolidWorks Professional and Premium now comes bundled with SolidWorks Visualize. This new connection supports a seamless workflow between SolidWorks CAD and SolidWorks Visualize, enabling photorealistic visualization without tying up a SolidWorks license. SolidWorks Visualize's interface reduces photorealistic visualization into just 5 easy steps. Importing of models, application of materials, environments, cameras, and final rendering can now be done by anyone in the least amount of time. The viewport can be rendered using Preview for approximated rendering, Fast for high-performance ray tracing, and Accurate, which can utilize multiple GPUs for fully photographic ray tracing. In each mode, what you see in the viewport is what you get in the final image. Dragging materials from the library enables everyone to paint their model incredibly quickly and easily. Materials can also be customized by adjusting the surface finish, color, texture, and more. Additional materials can also be obtained from the online community, which contains loads of free, professionally made assets. Just like materials, environments are applied by dragging and dropping them into the viewport from the library. Environments can be dynamically positioned and adjusted to get the lighting, shadows, and reflections just right. Multiple cameras can be used in order to generate a variety of image styles. Depth of field, artistic filters, and other camera effects help to deliver truly photographic images. Final renders can be initiated using either default or pre-configured render profiles. Once started, the image progress, estimated time remaining, and pause option are conveniently displayed. SolidWorks Visualize is the camera for SolidWorks data. It enables organizations to create, communicate, and collaborate with emotional content to drive innovation, design decisions, and better business solutions. Whether generating still images, animations, 360s, or real-time presentations, every design detail can be shown off with the best results in the least amount of time. SolidWorks Visualize. Fast, easy, fun visualization. SOLIDWORKS 2016 provides many more customer-driven enhancements to improve your every...
All right. So that flies through SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So we don't have that, but that's very similar to, that's what's like the next level, okay? You have to learn to walk before you can run, all right, in this case. That's a lot like Keyshot, where you can sort of export, drag and drop everything. But it really does pay to learn the basics first, get that understanding right, and then grow, and develop as you go. The good thing, well, one of the good things about rendering is there's a lot more content out there as far as tutorials go and videos go, because the rendering part is the sexy part, right? Everyone wants to be able to do really good renders. So there's a lot more content out there. What I'll say though as a tip is your render will not look good if your model doesn't look good. If you don't have the detail in your model, the render it won't be able to polish, what's not there. Okay, so get that modeling right first. All right, so our render tools tab, edit appearance up the top left, copy and paste, self-explanatory. I'll show how they work soon. And edit scene and edit decal. Integrated preview window, render, scene options, blah, blah, blah. This is all about the rendering setup, and these are all about your materials and your scene. Okay. Also, on your feature tree, this last tab here, Display Manager, is where all the information about the materials in your assembly or your part file are kept. So at the moment you can see there's not much in this one. I'm going to just remove those just so we're making sure we're starting from scratch. So at the top of this Display Manager tab, you've got your appearances, decals, and the scene, lights, and camera. The way I typically work, and would suggest you work as well, but develop your own method as you go. I always add materials and appearances first. I play around, get my camera angle right, and then last step, with that camera angle, I rotate the scene or change the environment. What happens with your materials, you add a material, looks good, you get it looking spot on, you change your scene, the material appearance changes. Okay, so there's always a bit of to and fro, but if you keep jumping between the two, it can be difficult to just sort of settle on one or the other. While you're learning, just try and get all your materials right, and then just play around with the scenes to see what works best. Okay, so on the right of the screen, there's this ball icon here, and that includes appearances, scenes, and decals as well. Now this is where you can actually add those materials. While you're adding them, you can press down this tack here, the pin, and that will pin that down. So it's a bit like Toolbox. You can have a look and see what's inside. So this is all built in. So we've got plastics, which has a large range of different plastic types. High gloss, medium gloss, low, soft touch, which is a bit more like, not necessarily rubber, but it's it's not really glossy, but something that you could press in. Textured. Now it's hard to see on the screen, but these are very. You can hover over them. You can see there. Very subtle textures. Now they're all black because you can add a texture and then change the color of the material. So you find the texture you want, change the color. Clear plastic, so that includes a lot of things like polypropylene, acrylic, which I used a lot, polyethylene, satin finish, patterned. So if you're looking for tread plate or dimples, that's there. Mesh and wax. So when I looked at that Sonos light box earlier, wax was one of the lights that I used on that box to then light it from the inside to give it that effect. Even though the box would have been made from what's called an opal acrylic, which is like an acrylic which you can light up. I didn't use acrylic for the material, I used wax for the material because that just gave the effect that I was looking for. You got metal, so you got all different types of metal: steel, chrome, aluminium, zinc, galvanized, and under each of those you'll see there's different options. So for some of them, like steel and aluminium, you've got a lot. So you got polished, brushed, satin finished, sandblasted, burnished, tread plate. Okay, a lot of different types in there. And I should say as well that everything that you see here is editable. You can always save a copy of the material as well. You can save it in your own library. So you're not just stuck with this. That's your starting point. You add it and then you can edit it. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can do that in your own time. Okay, have a look in your own files. Painted for cars, okay, or powder coating. Rubber, glass. Glass includes mirror, okay, or reflective clear glass. You got lights. So if you're going to add something like a neon tube, okay, or an area light, you know, something like the sun, okay, or a big light in the middle of the room which is glowing out, you might add area light to that object. Fabric is not that good, but there's some different types in there: canvas and cotton, carpet. Organic contains wood, which there's again a lot of different types of wood. And anyone that's worked with wood knows that there's like a finish face and an end face. So each of these materials typically have the finished, and then they'll have an end grain. All right, so if you're trying to show like the end grain of the wood on a certain edge, you can add that to a face and add the finished material to the top face. There's water. There's like a 2D fake water, and then there's sort of more 3D heavy ripple, etc. Miscellaneous includes leather, sponge, and skin. Stone includes a lot of sort of architectural stuff, paving, brick, etc., and then miscellaneous studio materials. So the studio materials are all the ones that are built into all the scenes, all right, which we'll look at in a sec. There's patterns. Okay. So we'll come back to the scenes later. So how to apply your materials? It works slightly differently whether you're in a part or an assembly. We're just going to start with a part file, just to learn the basics. So we're going to make this one metal. And actually, we'll make it plastic because I just want to show a few different colours. So just pick a type. We'll go low gloss. And we'll go red. So if I click and drag and drop that just in the viewport, that's going to add red to the entire part. Now I'll click and drag blue. So if I click and drag blue and I drop it on the actual body, it'll bring up this little shortcut menu. And this gives me different options for adding that material. So the first one there is the part icon. That will add it to the entire part. The second one is the body. So that'll add it to that solid body. There's only one solid body in this, so it's essentially the same thing. The next one is the feature. So I dropped it on the revolve. So in this case, it would add it to the revolve. There's the bottom section. And the last one is a face. Okay, just that outside face of that revolve. So I'll put this one on the revolve, and then I'll grab green, and I'll put that on the face. Okay, so you can see I've got red, blue, and green. In my Appearances tab, Display Manager, you can see those three materials. All right. And in the viewport, how I can edit those or play around with them is just by clicking on them. So if I want to edit this red material, I can click anywhere on that body. See this shortcut bar that comes up? I've got Appearances. I've also got Copy and Paste. If I press Copy, it's going to copy whatever is on that selection. Paste. Paste will paste whatever your last material was. So if I drop green on the last thing, it'll paste green. If I want to edit it, I can click this drop down, and here I can see the red material, and I can press the cross to remove, or click on the red, and I can edit it. And I'll come back to this in a second. When I click on this green face and click drop down, you can see here that there's 3 different materials added to that selection. How it works is there's a hierarchy. So the face material will override everything below it. So even though this has red and blue added as well, because it's added to the face, that overrides. So when you're doing your rendering, and if you're applying to a SolidWorks part that you've built, all right, if you had like a text cutout into a surface, let's say the entire surface was like a satin finish material, and then the cutout was a gloss, you could just drop that cutout onto that, that gloss material onto that cutout feature and just say apply to this feature. Okay, and it would do all the cutout faces. You don't have to select them all individually. All right, so that's how why SolidWorks is good for adding materials in. Okay, so to edit the materials, click on that icon there, or click here and go right click edit, and you can edit the appearance. So click on advanced, gives you a few more options. This is basically built on a color. You've got color sliders here, which you can click and drag, or you've got color grid, or you've got RGB. Okay, so if you have a certain color, you know something is, you can just type in the values. This is a bit more advanced, not for today, but when you're doing configurations, you can also have configurations with different appearances. So you can have configuration with something with a certain color and then change to a reverse or a different one. And that's to do with display states. Up the top here where it says selected geometry, if I change that to face, I can actually select other faces to be added with, or to have this material added to them. Or I can click to have them removed. Press the tick when you're happy and it'll add that material in. All right, so I'll just save and close that. So you can see how that's now in my assembly. So when you're in assembly mode, you can do this pretty much the same thing. I'm going to add acrylic to this form bracket. So if I add it to the face, it's going to make that face clear, but I want to add to that whole part. I'm going to add a steel. Let's go polish steel to these side plates. So you can see when I add it to one, it'll add it to both. Now, in an assembly, sometimes you might want the same part with different materials, in which case you click on this icon here, which is the assembly part. Okay, so that will only use or add the material to that component in the assembly. Then what you're able to do is add a different material to the other version, even though they're the same part file. If you open up that part file, you'll see there's no material added to that. Okay, it's only added in the assembly. So I'll just add a few more materials in. We'll add some wood, get the idea of how that works. Okay. That looks really dark. You can turn on real view graphics. Okay, so that's that little display icon here. All right, it'll give you a bit more of a real-like appearance. All right. So that's the basics of adding your materials. I'm not going to spend much time going through how to edit them in detail. Have a look at that in your own time. But there's plenty of basic ones there that you can use to get a good result. So after you're done with materials, the next step is either working out your camera or your scene, your environment. It depends what your aim is. Sometimes you might want to play around with different scenes, then find a really good angle. Other times you know what angle of view you want, so it's better just to go for that and then play with your scene afterwards to suit. So we'll do that first. We'll go with the camera angle first, and then change our environment after that. So cameras. For cameras, we want to click on our display manager up the top and go down to camera and right click, press add camera, and our screen will go to a split screen. On the right is what your view is through the camera. So it's very easy for you just to change the angle that you want, okay, and just move around. On the left, if you click in that left viewport, you can zoom out and you can see where that camera is and where the camera is targeting. Okay, so at the moment it's not targeting anything in particular. What you can do in your viewport, click on a part and the camera will target that selection. So it'll basically center the camera around whatever you select. You can do that in either of the views. If you're really set up, you can also, you might have another part in there which is acting as a camera. It might be a sketch or a little circle or sphere or something. You can position the camera by a selection as well. All right, but I never really use that. If we go down, scroll down to this camera setup, there's camera rotation. So that rotation is about sort of twist. Typically, you just want that at 0. Right, so if you've been rotating around, keep that at 0, and that will keep your part upright in the camera. And then we scroll down again. The last one, field of view, perspective. This is important for setting out sort of the realism or the how dynamic your image is. Okay, so I think standard cameras, I'm not a photography guy, all right, but I think standard cameras maybe 35, 50 inch, 50, all right, so that's what's set here. If you want to get a really different view, you can go to wide angle. Okay, and you can see how it sort of distorts that, makes it look huge. Or if you go out to telephoto, when you zoom out, there's very little perspective. I'm going to stick with 50, 35. There's no right or wrong, they're just different options. Depth of field, I'm not going to worry about. That's a bit more advanced, where the further away things are, they get blurrier, etc. Okay, but that sort of stuff's for more realism. So when you're happy with the angle, if you want, well, I'm pretty happy with that. But again, it's just by moving the mouse around, zooming in and out, making sure it's upright. When I'm happy, I press OK. That saved the camera. So under my display manager, drop down arrow, you can see camera 1. Right, if I want to edit that again, I click edit. If I want to go to that camera view, I hit the space bar, and that camera view is here. So I can go to that camera view and it's going to show me what it looks like. Okay. So if I hit render, that's the image that's going to render out. Alright, so now's a good time to talk about the setup options for the image, and then we'll get to the scene last. So under the options tab here on the render tools, this is where you basically set up the quality, the size, some of the lighting details, etc. of your render. Turn on dynamic help, that will just give you some tips as you're scrolling over things. Output image size, so this is how big it is, pixels. This is very small. I typically use a bigger size, 1920 by 1080, when I'm rendering. You can always bump it up. When you're learning, keep it small so the renders are quick. They should only take a couple of minutes. All right, and then you do a good one at the end when you're ready, set up, ready to present. You render out, and then use that file. You can set renders to automatically save files, in which case the image format here matters. All right, so there are all different types of images that you can save as. For learning, use JPEGs. Later on, use PNG files with transparency or TIFFs, but don't worry about that too much for now. Render quality, preview render quality. You can leave that at good. Previews are just for that, previews, okay? That's not the final render. You want that to be pretty quick. For final render quality, don't use maximum, just use best. All right, the difference between the two, you wouldn't be able to notice. The gamma, that controls the whiteness, okay, how bright that is, but that's something you can actually change after the render's completed. You can bump it up or down, so leave that. Bloom is to do with lighting. So when you have a light in your file, if you look at these lights in the ceiling and you sort of squint your eyes, you can see how they've got a bit of a glow around them. That's basically what bloom is. And then down here you've got contour and cartoon rendering. This gives you the ability to render the lines in your objects. So you could do a rendering with a black background with just white lines of your object, okay, or white lines over the materials that you've added. Okay, so there's different settings there. But those doing a render, like a cartoon render with just the line work there, you get a better quality image than if you were to just save like a screenshot as a JPEG. Okay, it gives you better quality lines. And here you can change the line thickness and color. This other stuff I never really play with, so we can ignore that. Right, but you want to set up your size, press OK. Alright, so we've got our camera angle, we've got our options set, last thing is the scene. So SolidWorks at the moment is using the default scene. So at the top of your screen here in the viewport, you can see it's using 3-point faded. And as you scroll down, you can see different examples of different scenes. So these are set as favorites, but you can click here, manage favorites, and you can tick other ones to add them, okay, as you like them. All of those scenes can be found in here. If we minimize appearances and we look at the scenes, you've got basic scenes, we've got studio scenes, and presentation. Not that I would use those for presentation. Presentation, they've got like real world environments. And then nothing in backgrounds. So basic scenes. So how to use a scene, just double click or click and drag. And you can see how that's going to change sort of the lighting, the highlights, where the light's coming from. And it'll change the appearances. So like look at the wood, for instance. Maybe that's not a good example. We'll see if we can find one that makes it a lot lighter or darker. Maybe not the wood. But those metal surfaces, which are glossy, you can see how that's now reflecting the environment that's around it. All right, so this is a courtyard background. So the basic scenes and studio scenes are sort of, you know, they're fake. All right, they're set up to have, you know, a concrete floor and lights coming from certain places, or this one, grill lighting, where there's a lot of different lights in the ceiling. And you can sort of see that. I'm just going to go off the camera mode for a second. All right, you can sort of see that reflected here. Right, now that reflection I think only comes up with RealView graphics on. Okay, but they're reflecting the lights that are in the ceiling of this environment. Same thing here, right? Not necessarily a good look. Whereas something like that with a few different highlights can be better. All right, so I'm just going to go for a basic scene. So I like this scene, but I don't like the way the shadow's coming. Okay, so the light's at the back and the shadow's at the front. What you can do with the scene is go to your display manager, click on the scene at the very top, right click and go edit. And this will bring up some options. So first up, the background. You can use the environment that's built into the scene, or you can have nothing there, just plain white. Okay, or you can set it to a color or a gradient, or you can load in an image that you've got. So you can load in a JPEG file of a certain scene and have that as your background. Floor reflections. So most of these scenes have these preset on or off. You can turn them on or off. Align floor. So sometimes you might want your floor to actually be a wall. Okay, so you can change what plane your floor is on, so you know it's at the back instead of underneath. So you can do that here. Sometimes as well your part might be floating, or you want it to be floating, in which case you can do floor offset, where you can increase that space, that dimension there, that'll make your part float. Okay, and then it gives you a bit of a shadow. Right, that's just in the basic stuff, but if you click on advanced, the main one here that I want to look at is environment rotation. So you see where the shadow is at the moment. As I rotate the environment, it's not actually giving me too much, but you can see the lighting change on the object. Now this might be actually better in our preview window, so we'll come to that in a second. But that's how you can change the environment. The other settings here are for the lighting, and this is where you can adjust brightness levels. Okay. Now I'm just going to press the tick, and we're going to have a look and see what this looks like. So to have a look, there are two ways. You can do integrated preview. When you click that, it's going to start rendering, preview rendering what's in your viewport. And as you rotate around, it'll re-render. It takes a little while, so I'm not going to do that. The main one I normally use is preview window. So this will actually pop up a new window, and if you're lucky enough to be working on two screens, you can have this on another screen, okay, while you're working and changing materials. So this updates live. So as you rotate your model or rotate your scene, this will update. So I'll just leave that there and come back to here, edit the scene, go to my advanced, and what you'll find now is I change that rotation, you'll see how that shadow changes in the preview. Okay. So it's darker at this point because the light is coming from behind. Alright, so I'll stay with that one. Alright, so at this point with the preview, you can go back and change your materials, okay, change your lighting, whatever you need to, but when you're happy, that's when you can hit final render, and I'll go through the render process. So, how SolidWorks works, it's got these radiance, things called a radiance pre-pass, which we'll go through 4 from 4. On the side, you can see render time, time remaining. This one will be really quick. I expect this to maybe only take a minute. But longer ones, once it gets to the last stage, it'll give you a time there. It also shows you the size and a few other stats and numbers. So it's processing through. You can also see your bar up the top here. So when you're rendering, some things to be aware of, things that slow down the render, any clear materials, okay, because there's light reflection, refraction behind them. So where I've got this section here, it's a little bit slower, okay? And lights, okay? If you have lights combined with clear materials, that can slow things down quite a bit too. So that sound you heard someone else's screen, that's a render completing. All right, and there we go. Now you can zoom in or out with the render. Now I left the cartoon mode on, so you can see the lines there.
I'll turn that off. So that's under my options. Uncheck. So I forgot to do that. We'll re-render. So with the SolidWorks photo view, when you render here, it'll actually automatically save your last 10 renders across the bottom. So you can very easily re-render, compare with the last one, see how you're going.
Is there any quality difference between preview and final?
Yes, because we set the quality difference.
Okay, in the
So the preview is just set to good, whereas the final one's set to best. So when the rendering's done, you've got a few options on the side. Typically you can adjust the gamma. I'm not sure if you can't do it while it's rendering. Also, while it's rendering, you can't edit your model. Okay, you can't do anything inside SolidWorks. Right, so when you're rendering, you want to do it at a time where you can do something else. If it's setting up to run for a while, set yourself up so you can do something else. With big renders, sometimes they can really slow down your computer a lot as well, so it's good to be set up to have other things to do. So with that render done, so you can see the input white level on the right, so that's something there you can adjust. Alright, so you can get darker or lighter. Okay, that affects your whole model. The saturation, a lot like Photoshop, I think it's the amount of colour. Alright, so you can go black and white. And yeah, you've got a few different output options here. Alpha output. So that's basically all the black is where there's nothing except the background. So you can save that file, you can save then this file, and you can overlay them in a Photoshop and you can mask out everything that except for your object and a shadow. Right, there are different ways you can use that. So when you're done, basically go save image, and this is where you can select any image type you want anyway. So where earlier it said JPEG, doesn't really matter, because here you get the choice, and you can save as multiple versions if you want. All right, and I think that's about it. Okay, a lot there, but it's fun to play around with. So